Mr. Sebahizi, thank you for accepting and taking time to speak with us as Uongozi Institute and for specifically for our In Focus show. We really try to tap into the minds of our African experts in various areas. And of course, for this particular area, we're focusing on the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, or the free trade area, and what it takes for it now to really take off. And so we want to focus on issues of partnerships and coordination. I mean, this is a huge agenda, and it's a big instrument. I mean, it's a humongous instrument with a big agenda. Why does the African Continental Free Trade Area need to discuss partnerships in effective implementation?
Well, you can see AfCFTA is a continental program which belongs to all Africans. It's a process because it's an outcome of negotiation. It has been negotiated by governments. Governments cannot negotiate it alone without consulting their own stakeholders. When they consult their stakeholders, they want to understand what is the interest of the people in all this. So when the agreement has been concluded, it has to be implemented. And it has to be implemented by countries again. Secondly, it has to show impact, and the impact on people. So you can see it's a comprehensive undertaking. It's not something that belongs to one institution. It's not something that belongs to one country. You cannot implement it alone. You have to make sure you get all stakeholders on board. I think the complexity of it is what requires having a strong partnership in the implementation. That's number one. The complexity of the agreement, different areas requiring expertise, having impact on different people and different institutions. Then the second aspect is where you need resources to implement it. So if you need resources, then you have to mobilize resources as well. Some people will contribute technically, but others have to contribute financially to the implementation. So partnerships, there's no way you can avoid partnership.
Thank you for that response, and it's very clear. But I'd like to then just probe a little bit further. When we're talking about partnerships, the importance are very clear. And in these partnerships, can we do it alone as African nations? Are we talking about partnering amongst and within ourselves as African nations?
Let's first look at the categories of partners that we might have in mind when it comes to partnerships. We can have partners within Africa, yes. We can have partners outside Africa. Each and everyone can play their own role. We cannot say we can do it alone, but we have to do our part before we look for external partners. So if you look at the categories of partners we are looking for, there are those strategic partners that have a direct interest or direct stake into the AfCFTA business. You are talking about increasing intra-African trade. Yes. You already have continental institutions that have that mandate to contribute to increment of intra-African trade. For example, we have Africa Export and Import Bank, which is established mainly to support private sector to contribute to export, also contribute to trade on the continent. You have African Development Bank, which is mandated to contribute to the development of the continent, especially infrastructure development. So those are some of the African institutions that we know they have the mandate to contribute to economic development. Then you have other institutions that are representing the interest of the people. You can have non-government organizations. You can have organizations that are overseeing interest of different categories of people, be it women, be it young Africans, be it small and medium enterprises, traders, manufacturers, shippers. All those groups of people, they have their own institution that oversee their interests. Those are, again, partners that we have to work with, so that they make sure they contribute to the overall goal of the AfCFTA. And then you have also other financial partners who normally support governments to do the reforms that are necessary, because the role of government is very important, especially when it comes to regulatory and policies formulation. So there are institutions that support government to do that, and there are also governments that can do it using their own budget. Then we have regional economic communities whose mandate is mainly promoting regional integration. So you can't do away with them. You have to work with them. So you can see there is a number of partners in the continent that we have to engage before we think of European Union, before we think of United States, before you think of China, before you think of other international partners. So I'm not saying we exclude them, but I'm saying, have we exhausted our engagement with African partners?
Thank you for that, Mr. Sebahizi. And you already pointed to one important partner. You've mentioned the regional blocks that are already in place. We already have SADC, we have ECOWAS, we have AAC, for example. How then is the African Continental Free Trade Area going to be working with these regional blocks in terms of partnering with them? How is there alignment with these other blocks that are already in place?
It's good to use the word alignment, because regional blocks are there with a mandate to promote regional integration within their respective regions. If you have East African Community, you know who are the members of East African Community. So you promote integration among those members of East African Community. Then if you are COMESA, you know the members of COMESA, you promote integration among those members of COMESA. The same for ECOWAS, ECAS. We have 8 regions across the continent, all of them contributing to the same objectives in their respective region. That's number one. Number two, you have countries that belong to those regions, but whose membership overlap in one group and in the other.
Yes.
You have DRC, a member of East African Community, a member of COMESA, a member of ECAS, a member of SADC. So how do you deal with that kind of overlapping membership? So the issue of overlapping membership is the second aspect that we have to tackle. Because of that, there is a number of commitments which countries have made in one region or the other, and while trying to implement them, it affects another region. I give you one example. If DRC decides to open up its market to East Africans, I'm sure members of SADC who see DRC as part of SADC are going to ask DRC, why opening up our market? Because DRC will be also part of the SADC market. So there will be no point then of starting having conflicts among regions. So you need a continental framework that can look at it globally, holistically. So that's the first challenge that we are addressing, the challenge of overlapping membership. The AfCFTA brings together regions to work harmoniously. That's number one. Number two, there is an issue of intra-regional trade and inter-regional trade. If you are trading between East Africa and West Africa, you are dealing with two different trade regimes. exporter from Kenya who is trading in Ghana will have to respect the rules of ECOWAS because the rules of EAC will not apply in Ghana. So where there are challenges like non-tariff barriers, then the trader will not know where to go. He will not know whether to go to ECOWAS or to go to EAC. So then there has to be another policy framework that link EAC and ECOWAS to facilitate trade between Kenya and Ghana, for example, or Kenya, Nigeria, or Tanzania, Nigeria. So that necessity of linking the regions also justifies the existence of AfCFTA. Then thirdly, the institutional architecture. You negotiate globally, you have a continental policy, but implementations take place locally. Either you implement at national level or you implement at regional level. So again, the role of regional economic communities becomes very important when it comes to coordinating implementation and also stakeholder engagement. So now you can see there is no overlap, there is rather complementarity.
Okay, and so one can pose as the devil's advocate and say, is this bigger tool, the African Continental Free Trade area and the agreement, is it not adding another layer of bureaucracy?
No, it's not. I give you an example. We have what we call elimination of a mechanism for elimination of non-tariff barriers. In East Africa, there is already a mechanism that is established, and it is working very well. Any trader who has issue along the northern corridor, let's say from Mombasa to Kigali, they can use that mechanism to address the non-tariff barriers. If you are trading between Dar es Salaam and Kinshasa, you can still use the EAC NTB's mechanism. But if you are trading between one region to the other, then you need a continental mechanism. So the continental mechanism works where the trading partners are coming from different regions. So it's not an overlap, it's not another layer of bureaucracy, it's something that happens where the region has not covered. So talking about trade facilitation, you want to cross the border, there are rules that govern crossing the border. If it's a border between two countries that belong to the same community, then the rules of the community applies. But if it's a border between two countries from two different communities, then you have to apply the AfCFTA rules. Yeah.
Thank you for that, because I think some would say, okay, is this yet another complication to an already complicated area? So thank you for clearing that up. But Mr. Sebahizi, we also have economic and trade relations with nations outside of the continent. I think this goes back to remember the original first question that, in terms of can we do it on our own as Africans? And some of us are party to some international agreements. How do we then marry those relations with the African Continental Free Trade Area?
We have, let's say, we have been enjoying trade with the European Union. Yes. For many years, Europe has been the main trading partner with Africa. The challenge has been what in economics we call terms of trade. Terms of trade, it means if I'm exporting this quantity of products, how much do I get as a payment compared to how much I pay when I import the same quantity of products? So you import a basket of goods, regardless of what type of goods, it's just a basket. Then you also export a basket of goods. You end up getting let's say $100 while exporting a basket, but you pay $1,000 to import the same basket. So that's where the terms of trade is very important. So why the terms of trade between Africa and Europe have not been favorable to Africans is because of the nature of what we export. We export raw materials and processed products which have not added any value, and then their price in international market is very low. And most of the time, the price is not determined by Africans, it's determined by Europeans. But when we buy from Europe, we pay much higher than what we should be paying. So that complication then has made Africa think twice. Africa can resolve that challenge using two ways. One, you can focus on producing what you consume, then you reduce the cost of importation. If you are able, for example, to produce 80% of what you consume, then you can only import 20%. Today, we are currently importing more than 80%. So that's number one. Number two, if Africa is able to add value to everything that we trade before we export it, then we are going to gain more in terms of financial flows than we are gaining today. You get your raw materials, you process them, you get agricultural products, you process them, you add value before you export them. Because that's what has been, keeping Africa under a vicious circle of poverty.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think that you're absolutely correct. And so, Mr. Sebahizi, based on now, the architecture of the African Free Trade area and the agreement, of course, has taken months and years of hard work just to put it in place. What lessons can we learn from other regional blocs that have done this and have done this well? What can we learn?
There are two things that let's say three things that we look for in any economic integration. The first one, you are consolidating a market to attract investment. If you put your market together, you have the same rules governing your market, then it becomes much attractive for one investor to come and establish in that region. Because at the end, their production will find a market in one place. So that ground rule of consolidation of market is very important if you want to develop. Then you will bring in more investment. The second premise is the pooling of resources to develop regional and continental value chain. If, for example, you are able to become self-sufficient in agricultural products, you will not have one country feeding the whole continent, but you will have countries complementing each other. Then what Tanzania is able to produce can be exported to Ghana, and what Ghana is able to produce can be exported to Tanzania. By exchanging that production within the continent, then you are not spending money importing from outside. Because that exchange happens on the continent, you don't necessarily have to buy US dollars to get goods from somewhere else in the world. Then the third aspect, if you are able to pool your resources together to consolidate your efforts to produce what you need, then you save money. The third aspect is now looking at how do we build our institutions, because most of businesses happen across borders. It's not about what happens within the country, but it's about what happens across the borders. If you have to trade between 5 countries, then you need an institution that will link those 5 countries. Because at the end, any trader or investor will be at high risk if no one is responsible for your business. So a country can only be responsible for businesses under their own jurisdiction. But once you are trading among 5 countries, then you deal with 5 different jurisdictions. So with this regional continental integration, you create regional and continental institutions that can guide business people regardless of countries they are operating in. And then this makes it more predictable for businesses to operate. Otherwise, each one will just confine themselves in one country because it becomes risky to expand their business outside another country.
Thank you for that. That really makes sense, those 3 main points. And so as we're wrapping up, Mr. Sebahizi, this is a big agenda, and it's a continent-wide agenda. How then do we work as a continent to make sure that there is alignment, overall alignment, to really push and to drive this agenda forward?
This, I think, there is already a policy framework because AfCFTA is one for the continent. It's one policy for all African countries. We can say that now we are developing one common trade policy. It touches on governing trade, trade in goods, trade in services. We have a policy on investment, which is going to govern investment across the continent. We will have one policy governing intellectual property rights. We will have one policy governing competition across the continent. We have one policy governing digital trade across the continent. And we also have complementary policies to ensure inclusion of women and youth and SMEs in the market. So this policy is already a sort of alignment across the continent. What you need to do now in the process of implementation, countries have to look at their respective national laws and regulations and see if they are in line with the continental one. If they are not, then countries have to align their own laws to the continental, because the continental policy takes over or takes precedence over national policies. And it also takes precedence over regional policies.
So this is almost like the mother law.
Yes.
In terms of when we're talking about trading.
Yes.
At the Africa level, this is our mother.
Yes.
Our mother law.
So each country has to assess itself and see, are we in line with the continental policy?
So I think that's important. So as we come to an end, Mr. Sebahizi, what then would be your 1 or 2 words of whether it's advice or words of wisdom or food for thought to leave us with as Africans, as we're now embarking in implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area?
The first one is ownership, because this AfCFTA has to be owned by the owners. And that ownership will have to come from Africans. If we don't own AfCFTA, someone else is going to take it away from us. Because it is good for us, but if we don't own it, someone will take it away from us, for good or for bad. So ownership is very important, and Africans have to get curious of what AfCFTA is and see the role that they can play within its implementation. Then the second one is mindset change. Mindset change to start looking at opportunities that we have in Africa rather than focusing on problems. It's only through tapping into these opportunities that we can solve our problems. Yes, Africa is not safe from all the problems that we see, but we have far more opportunities to address those challenges. And I think if we just change the mindset, we see what is there, we see what can be done, we see what we are able to do, what is within our own means, and we do it, I'm sure we can get far. I just give you one example. There are a few Africans who can buy from Africa when they're able to buy, when they're able to get what they need in Africa, not just because it's not available, but because of the mindset. Just because of the mindset. I give you, look at the type of trade that happens in Africa. People are busy moving containers from different parts of the world. Before they even think twice, are we importing something that Africa doesn't have? They don't think about it. They just say, okay, we want to do trade. It means importing from China. It means importing from Europe. And that's what they call trade. But if you are just doing trade to import, to me, that's not trade. Because trade, you have to look at it both ways. Yes, you import, but you also export. You can only import what you don't have. If you are importing even what you have, and you are not exporting anything, then you are losing money. You are just wasting money.
So thank you, Mr. Sebahizi. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today and acknowledging that you've been extremely busy for the past few weeks, really working with us at Uongozi to put this amazing event together. But even in all of that, and being a presenter, you still have taken this time to speak to us and really to set clarity in terms of these areas, because, you know, we hear about this and we've now seen this and people are talking about it, but really now to put it in context and to make it more practical for us to really understand. And I think you've really helped in setting that removing some of the fog and helping us have more clarity in terms of what this instrument is.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And welcome to Tanzania. Welcome to Uongozi Institute and welcome to Tanzania.
It's my second home.
We're neighbors.
Thank
yes,
you.
Yes,
Thank
we're
you.
neighbors. So thank you very much.
Karibuni sana.
Asante.